The longer I live and the older I get, the more I realize that adults just don't exist. We're all man children growing taller and forever growing up, learning tricks along the way, enrolled in the school of life in which the only real answer you have to all the tests it gives you is winging it and learning from what happens and just repeating that cycle and seeing where things take you. No one knows what they're doing. I don't know what I'm doing. In my own case, a lot of people in my life see me and think I have all my shit together. And yes, in some aspects, I very much do. But in a lot of important aspects, I really don't. And I can feel like a mess sometimes, and those closest to me know that. When it comes to every adult I've ever met, from my parents to teachers, uncles, aunts, grandparents, priests, everyone. The more I learn about them and the more I hear about them and get to know them, the more I start to see that they have nothing figured out as well. And they can be a mess themselves. Some of them struggle with managing emotions that date back to their childhood. I mean, a lot of them actually. A lot of them have done so many things and still feel aimless in their life. So many of them are just struggling to be happy. So many of us are just struggling to be happy and to find purpose, to find structure in our lives. A lot of people struggle with addiction. A lot of people struggle with finding their way, and finding the answers to all these questions that we have. And as I've just gotten older, it just becomes so much clearer that everyone's just trying their best and no one knows what they're doing. No one knows the answers, the important answers. We're all just asking ourselves the same questions and just grasping for them as we go through life. And I think it's the same for a lot of historical figures. A lot of the historical figures we've celebrated and we've placed on a pedestal are also some of the messiest human beings. Van Gogh, one of the greatest artists in history, lived a miserable life and ended up committing suicide. Martin Luther King, the author of the American Civil Rights Movement, he was a cheater, he was an adulterer, and he had over 40 plus mistresses, right? Friedrich Nietzsche, one of the greatest philosophers, one of the most revolutionary philosophers, he lost his virginity in a brothel, caught syphilis, and, his work barely even sold throughout his life. Jim Carrey, one of the great actors of our generation, he himself struggles with depression and feelings of sadness and meaninglessness. And he has this famous quote where he says he wishes everyone could become rich and famous and achieve all the dreams they've ever wanted and get everything they've ever wanted, just so they could see that that wasn't the answer. And that isn't the answer. You'll never find the answers no matter how hard you try. And it's so evident by looking at the adults around you, looking at so many, celebrities, so many historical figures. No one has it figured out. No one knows what they're doing at the end of the day. In the grand scheme of things, no one knows what they're doing. We're all just children that were imposed with responsibilities and imposed with all of these questions as to how we're supposed to navigate this life and how we're supposed to deal with all of this. And we weren't given any manual, right? We're all just winging it, and we experience things and we just try to learn from them. And that's all we can really do. All we can do is try. And so, what can we make of this, right? What can we make of the fact that, all of these so-called adults are just grown up children, still in the process of growing up and figuring everything out. Well, I think number one is it's developing a humility and an awareness that no matter where you are in life, no matter who you are, no matter what you do or how rich you get or how much you get done or even how much you know, you're never going to have the answers. Things are never ever gonna make sense to you, no matter how hard you try. And I think stressing over stressing over finding the answers is just gonna make you lose your mind because no one knows the answers. No one knows the answers. We've had so many people throughout history dedicate their entire lives to finding the answers. Generations upon generations. Still, we can't answer simple questions like, what do we actually want? Who are we? Why are we here? How are we supposed to go about things? How are we supposed to live the good life? And we still don't know those things, and we spend our entire lives just trying to look for those answers, but we'll never find them, right? And so just enjoy the process of figuring things out. Enjoy the process of jumping into the unknown and of learning, of experiencing things, because that's all you can really do. But just know that no matter what you do, you always need to have that humility and awareness that you're never going to have the answers, and that's really just how it is. And I think number two is that, despite everything that I've said, a lot of the people I mentioned earlier are historical figures or are great people for a reason. They did great things. They did phenomenal things. They revolutionized the world, as we know it. But yet, when you look at them, they were ordinary people that didn't know what they were doing. And so I think what you can get from that is, it doesn't matter who you are. You can know nothing, but that doesn't mean you can't do great things. Just because you don't know how doesn't mean you can't. Just because you don't know why doesn't mean there's no point in trying. Because you have to try, that's the only thing we can do. We're all just winging it. But even amidst winging it and knowing nothing, we can still do great things. We can still love people. We can still create things that mean something to us. And we can build these relationships that, give us fulfillment. And we can still do everything we can to not go out into the night so quietly. And so I think the main message of all of this, at least to me, is just, if you don't have everything figured out, if you feel like you're winging everything and you feel like you know nothing, well, that's because you don't. And it's because you're not supposed to, because you're never going to. And even the greatest people out there that you've placed on a pedestal, whether it's your parents, whether it's historical figures, whether it's all these gurus or influencers that seem to have it all figured out and, living the dream life, right? Chances are they're also struggling in some way. They're also grasping for answers. And yeah, the truth is no one knows what they're doing. So it's okay if you don't know what you're doing, This is also a reminder to myself, because a lot of the time I feel like I don't know what the hell I'm doing. But at the end of the day, all you can really do is try. Yeah, I've already said that, but that's just what I keep realizing time and time again. You just have to try, and you just have to keep trying. Our time on this earth is limited, and it can get tiring to try and to try again and to try again and to fail, and to learn all of these things bit by bit. But we're all gonna die one day, and you'll finally get the rest that you need. But for now, this is your only life, so you might as well try, and you might as well learn what you can. But just know that as you go through things, you're not gonna know what you're doing, and you're never gonna be ready for things, and you just have to do what you can. But yeah, I think that sums up most of what I have to say. Thank you guys for watching. I appreciate you all. And yeah, I mean, we've reached 20 subscribers, recently. And I know to most people, 20 subscribers is very little. And, or like, it's basically nothing, which, I get. On this platform, you're used to seeing millions upon millions or hundreds of thousands, like it's nothing. But, I just remember that 20 people, in a room, listening to what I have to say and, maybe resonating with it, maybe not resonating with it. I just think it's cool. So thank you for the 20 subs, I appreciate that. And yeah, I think that's all for now. I'm gonna go. Have a good morning, my fellow peasants. Peace.